Who gave you the power to judge? The shadow's form flickered, as if the wind had tried to scatter it, but it did not disappear. The shadow took another step closer. Every time you saw injustice and did nothing, every time you held back your rage, every time you wished for punishment but stayed your hand, Kwame's breath hitched. Now, something deep within him had. The shadow raised its hand, its long, black fingers stretching toward Kwame's chest. I do it you will not. Kwame's skin prickled. Had he created this? Had his anger, his unspoken rage, given birth to a hunter in the darkness? He shook his head. No, this had to end. I will stop you. By dawn, a scream shattered the morning air. Kwame spun around, heart pounding. The cry had come from the western side of the village. He sprinted toward the sound, his spear gripped tightly in his hand. Villagers gathered in a circle, whispering in fear. Kwame pushed through the crowd, then stopped cold. Lying in the dirt was Nana, the village traitor. His eyes were wide open in terror. Deep, jagged claw marks covered his chest, the same marks Badu had. Someone gasped. Another one? A woman whispered, "This is not the work of a man." Kwame's stomach twisted. The shadow had killed again. His shadow. But why Nana? Kwame clenched his fists. What had Nana done to deserve this? Then he remembered. Nana had been caught cheating the villagers many times. He used false weights on his scale to take more yams, more grain, more gold than he deserved. Baba Kofi had warned him. The chief had warned him. But Nana never stopped. The shadow had judged him. Kwame's breath came fast. He needed to find it. Stop it. But how do you stop something that is a part of you? Call the elders, Kwame said at last. We must gather tonight. As the villagers carried Nana's body away, Kwame felt the sun shift behind him. And in that moment he saw it. His shadow moved on its own, just for a second, just long enough to let him know. It was watching, and it was waiting for the next sinner. That night, the village elders sat around a roaring fire. Their faces were grim, their voices hushed. We must find what is killing our people, Chief Edu said, gripping his staff. This is no ordinary beast. Kwame sat among them, his hands curled into fists. He wanted to speak, to tell them what he knew, but how could he? Would they believe that his own shadow had become a hunter of the guilty? We must be careful, Baba Kofi said. A darkness walks among us. First Badu, then Kojo, now Nana, all men who had done wrong in some way. The elders exchanged nervous glances. Perhaps the gods are punishing them, one muttered. Or something far worse has awakened, said another. Kwame swallowed hard. He knew exactly what had awakened, and it would not stop. Who do you think will be next? Someone whispered. The fire crackled, filling the silence that followed. Kwame's stomach twisted. The shadow had only killed those who had done evil, who had sinned. But who else was guilty in the village? His mind raced. There were many people who had secrets, many who had done wrong. But the shadow hunted on its own terms, and there was no way to stop it. Suddenly, the wind shifted. The fire flickered wildly. Shadows stretched across the ground. Kwame stiffened. One of the shadows moved. It slithered across the ground like liquid darkness, twisting and flickering. It was here. His breath hitched. He rose to his feet. Everyone go home, he said, his voice urgent. Lock your doors. Do not come out until morning. The elders looked at him, confused. Why? Chief Adu asked. Kwame hesitated. What could he say? That something was hunting in the darkness? That even now, it was choosing its next victim? Trust me, he said. Just stay inside. The elders murmured but obeyed. The meeting ended. Kwame was the last to leave. He stepped away from the firelight, watching as the village darkened. Then he saw it. A shadow detached from the others. It slid across the ground, moving without a body. Kwame's chest tightened. It was going somewhere. No. To someone. and Kwame had to stop it. He broke into a run. Kwame's feet pounded against the dirt path as he chased the moving shadow. His heart hammered in his chest. The night was thick with silence, but the shadow moved swiftly, slithering across the village like smoke. Who was next? Who had sinned? Kwame's breath came fast as he followed the shifting darkness. It turned a corner, slipping between two huts. Then it stopped, outside a small hut with a thatched roof. Kwame recognized it immediately. It was Elder Yaw's home. His stomach twisted. Yaw was one of the oldest men in the village, respected by all. Why would the shadow come for him? Kwame crept closer, his body tense. He watched as the shadow slithered through the small gap beneath the door, entering the hut. A terrible chill ran down his spine. He had to stop it. Now, without thinking, he burst through the door. Inside, the hut was dark, lit only by a small clay lamp. Elder Yaw sat up in bed, his eyes wide with fear. "Who's there?" the old man croaked. Kwame didn't answer. His eyes were on the floor. The shadow had stretched, growing taller, taking shape. It was no longer just a slithering mass. It was a figure, a dark, twisted version of Kwame himself. Yaw gasped, What is this?" Kwame's heart pounded. "You have to run," he shouted. But it was too late. The shadow lunged. Yaw let out a strangled cry as the darkness wrapped around him. He struggled, his hands clawing at the air, but the shadow was too strong. Then, the screaming stopped. Yaw slumped forward. The shadow released him and melted back into the floor. Kwame rushed to the elder's side, shaking him. "Yaw!" The old man's eyes fluttered open, but they were clouded with terror. You don't understand," he whispered. His voice was barely there. I thought no one knew. I thought it was buried forever." Kwame's breath caught. "What did you do?" Yaw's face twisted in pain. "Long ago, I betrayed someone. I took something that was not mine, and now..." His breathing was shallow. "Now it has come for me." Kwame's stomach dropped. This was no ordinary curse. The shadow hunted the guilty, no matter how long ago the sin was committed, and it was not stopping. The air in the hut grew colder. Kwame felt the weight of unseen eyes pressing down on him. He turned and saw his shadow moving again. It wasn't over. This was just the beginning. Yaw's breathing was ragged, his old hands trembling. The weight of his confession filled the hut like smoke. Kwame could feel the truth pressing against his chest, thick and heavy. But there was no time. The shadow had moved again. Kwame turned sharply. His own shadow flickered against the hut's wall, but it was wrong. The edges twisted and curled unnaturally, like something alive, something watching. And then it pointed. Kwame's blood turned cold. The shadow was showing him something. Someone. "Who is next?" Kwame whispered, his voice barely audible. Yaw's face was filled with terror, but he managed to choke out a single name. Kwesi. Kwame's pulse quickened. Kwesi was a fisherman, a quiet man who lived near the river. He was well-liked, always providing food for the village. But if the shadow was hunting him, what had he done? Yaw gripped Kwame's wrist, his strength fading. "You must stop it," he croaked. "Before it takes everyone." Kwame nodded, determination rising inside him. He had to act now. He bolted from the hut. The village was still, wrapped in the deep silence of the night. The air felt wrong, too heavy, too thick. The moment Kwame stepped outside, his own shadow slid ahead of him, stretching unnaturally across the ground. It was leading him towards the river. Kwame ran, his heart thundering in his chest. The path twisted through the trees, the air growing colder with each step. Then he saw it, a small figure near the water. Kwesi. He was kneeling at the river's edge, his hands gripping something buried in the mud.